The last thing I ever said to my wife was, "Make sure the wine is chilled for the investors." I didn't know she'd be dead before morning. I didn't know she'd die in another man's penthouse. And I didn't know the man was the same one we toasted across the table 2 nights earlier, Luca Barone, our so-called silent partner. Turns out he was only silent about one thing: how deep inside my marriage he'd already carved his place. They said it was a heart attack. I called it divine timing. But even death couldn't stop the storm Isolde left behind, one filled with debt, betrayal, and a stepdaughter who looked at me like I was disposable. At her funeral, they waited for me to speak. I didn't even show up. Instead, I walked into our Fifth Avenue apartment, poured myself a 2009 Cabernet, and called my lawyer. I wasn't going to mourn her. I was going to unmake her. And I was going to do it wearing the same suit she once bragged she picked out, because I wanted her to recognize it when I took everything back. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The wine bottle trembled slightly in my grip, not from grief, not even regret, from restraint. Cold, calculated restraint. Hours earlier, I'd been standing in front of a Venetian mirror, lacing the cuffs of a tailored tuxedo, preparing for the gala my wife insisted would change everything. Instead, hours later, I stood in the middle of our Fifth Avenue penthouse, her death echoing in every untouched glass and glittering lie we'd ever shared. Isolde Wynne Pierce was found dead in the bed of her lover, Luca Barone. Penthouse Suite, Ritz-Carlton. A heart attack, the report said. Too much cocaine, too much sex, too much pleasure for one night to bear. But what did I feel when I heard the news? Relief. There was no collapsing to my knees, no hand over the mouth, no sobbing into a silk handkerchief. Instead, I poured myself a 2009 Chateau Margaux and called Jonas Crane, my lawyer. "She's dead," I said flatly. He paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm done pretending to be. Because here's the truth. I was married to a fantasy, and Isolde, gilded and sharp-edged, was its cruel architect. Her beauty opened every door, but her poison filled every room. And for years, I let it, until she didn't just lie. She demolished, publicly, systematically, intimately. I'd played the doting husband long enough. Isolde didn't love people. She loved control. Our marriage was a tool. I was leverage, funding, status, until I stopped playing along. When I demanded full transparency in our vineyard holdings, she laughed. When I insisted Sage, the daughter she had from another man but I raised as mine, attend therapy, she scoffed. Then, she started cutting me out of everything. The moment she died, her mask shattered. People whispered, speculated. Some pitied me, others assumed I was complicit. But I knew the truth, and so did Jonas. "Grayson," he said, "you realize this changes everything. No will, no prenup, no transfer of shares to Sage. The estate is yours." I swirled the wine in my glass. "Then we start tomorrow." He exhaled, the kind of breath lawyers take before blood hits paper. "There's something else." Of course there was. Luca Barone was trying to move the European trademarks to a shell company. Isolde's name was on the forms. I stopped the transfer this morning. I leaned back against the marble counter. That explained her sudden need to renegotiate our business agreement last week, the same night she flew to D.C. and never came home. "Thank you," I said. "You're not angry?" "No. I'm ready." Micah Soto, the only person who truly knew what I lived through, showed up that night unannounced. He brought bourbon and his silence. We sat on the terrace. The city buzzed beneath us. Manhattan was unbothered, indifferent to grief. But Micah wasn't. He had that look again, the one that said, "I would have burned the world for you if you asked." "Tell me this isn't a relief," he finally said. I didn't answer. He leaned closer. "You don't have to feel guilty. She didn't die a victim. She died exactly the way she lived, recklessly, selfishly, and in someone else's bed." I sipped slowly. "You're not wrong. You deserve to breathe, Grayson." I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding my breath. And then came Sage. I hadn't seen her since Isolde's death was announced. She didn't come to the penthouse, didn't call. But when she finally did appear, she didn't knock, just barged in like she owned the place, face flushed, furious. "You're disgusting," she snapped, standing in the doorway like a prosecutor. I set my glass down. "Good morning, Sage. How dare you not come to her funeral? You didn't even speak. They waited. Everyone waited. And you were just gone." "I didn't owe your mother a performance." "You owed her decency." That made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was so pitifully blind. She cheated. She lied. She siphoned off our vineyard assets to a man who called me family, and then slept with him while pretending we were rebuilding. Your mother didn't deserve decency. She deserved truth. She stepped closer, trembling with rage. "You think you're going to win now? That everyone's just going to forget?" I stood calmly, meeting her eyes. "No one has to forget, but they will remember what she did. And you'll remember who cleaned up the mess." She blinked. "You were an adult, Sage. You watched it all. You knew. And you stayed silent. I was protecting her." "No," I said. "You were protecting your lifestyle." She didn't deny it. I gave her the envelope Jonas had prepared. Notice of immediate probate control, termination of Isolde's discretionary fund for Sage, and dissolution of the trust tied to Luca Barone's stake in the winery. "This is war?" she whispered. "This is accountability." She tore the envelope open, skimmed it, and looked up at me like I'd slapped her. "You're cruel." "No," I said. "I'm free." That night, I stood in our bedroom and took down her last photo from the wall. She had framed it herself, a black and white from our vineyard's launch party. Her in white, me in black, Sage between us. Perfectly posed, perfectly false. I slid it into the bottom drawer of her armoire and locked it. Then I packed a single overnight bag, called a driver, and left. Micah was waiting at the Carlisle, already checked in. He opened the door before I knocked. "Done?" I stepped inside. Beginning. The chapter of silence was over. I wasn't going to mourn her. I was going to unmake her. And by the time I finished, even her grave would look empty. The morning after the funeral that wasn't, I woke to a soft knock against the hotel suite door. It wasn't room service. I hadn't ordered anything. It wasn't Micah either. He'd left an hour ago for a deposition, promising he'd meet me later at the vineyard offices. It was Jonas Crane, briefcase in hand, coat damp from a sudden spring drizzle. "Grayson," he said without waiting to be invited in. "We need to talk. Now." He closed the door behind him like he was sealing us inside a vault. I gestured toward the chair across from the fireplace. "Let me guess. Sage." Jonas sat, flipping open the brass clasps of his briefcase with a click that sounded far too much like a trigger. "Not just Sage. Luca Barone filed a motion through his counsel this morning. He's contesting the probate on the grounds of co-managed estate interest. Claims Isolde intended to sign over half her holdings before her death." I let the words settle before speaking. "She didn't." No, but she signed a draft. Luca's lawyers are claiming intent. I clenched my jaw. Is that enough? Jonas hesitated. Depends on the judge. Barone's banking on public sympathy. You're the estranged widower who didn't even show up at the funeral. He's already floating a press piece framing himself as the true partner at her side at the end. I stood, walking to the window. Manhattan's skyline was slate gray, washed in rain. It suited the day. I want this ended, Jonas. We'll fight it, he said calmly. But there's more. Sage's personal trust. Isolde tried to reinstate it last month. Quietly. If Barone gets leverage, he'll push that through too. You'd lose majority control of Wynne Pierce Estates. Of course, Isolde's posthumous revenge plan was unfolding exactly the way she would have wanted it, through others. But I wasn't the man she once manipulated, and I wasn't afraid of a public fight anymore. I'll handle Sage, I said. You handle Barone. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Handle her how? I didn't answer directly. I already had a plan. I arrived at the main office of Wynne Pierce Estates by noon. The building, nestled between two luxury galleries in Chelsea, still bore her initials on the gold-plated door. IWP, clean serif font, subtle nod to old money. She always hated ostentation, unless it came in the form of jewelry or silence. Inside, the staff glanced up like ghosts. Half of them had adored her. The other half feared her. No one spoke as I passed through reception. My name had returned to the leadership directory 2 hours after her death. Jonas made sure of it. When I stepped into her former office, now mine, my pulse didn't even spike. The space was curated perfection. White lacquered walls, minimalist furniture, framed covers of Wine Spectator and Harper's Bazaar with our bottles, and her face on them. But it was the safe I was after. Behind a sliding shelf of rare vintages and legacy ledgers, I found the steel vault. I entered the code she never bothered changing. Inside, 2 passports, 1 external drive, a ledger in her handwriting, and a folder marked Zurich. I took the drive, placed it in my pocket, and locked the rest back in. It wasn't greed. It was insurance. She used to mock me for keeping paper trails. But I knew something she didn't. Electronic ghosts always come back to haunt. I turned to find Sage standing in the doorway, arms folded. You really don't waste time. You should try it, I said. It's liberating. She walked into the office without asking. This place still smells like her. She wore too much oud. Her jaw tightened. Luca's suing. You know that, right? I do. Then you know how ugly this will get. He has emails. She told him things. She told everyone things, Sage. She was a pathological strategist. You don't care about her reputation? No, I said, because I care about yours. She flinched. What's that supposed to mean? You're still young enough to choose who you become. But if you stand with Luca, you'll become a footnote in a scandal that won't protect you when he folds. I'm not a child, Grayson. No, I agreed. But you're still her daughter. That silenced her. I handed her an envelope. Again, this one wasn't legal. It was personal. Inside, a letter she'd written to me 2 years ago, after one of her more vicious public scenes at a charity ball. It was half apology, half threat. I'd kept it, not out of sentiment, but foresight. She told you everything she told him, I said, and more. But I'm not here to ruin you, Sage. I just want the truth. She stared at the letter like it was radioactive. You think that absolves you? No, I said. But it might remind you of who she really was. Sage didn't say anything. She left quietly. Good. Let her think. That night, Micah returned to the suite, and we worked our way through the encrypted contents of the external drive. Ledger files, old legal correspondence, and a folder labeled Saratoga. It was the name of our failed expansion winery, the one Isolde insisted we sell after financial pressures. But now I saw the truth. She hadn't sold it. She'd buried it, moved the shell company under an LLC linked to Barone's consulting firm. "Look at the dates," Micah said. "She started this a year ago." I stared at the screen. "And used my name on the paperwork. Forgery? Coercion. She made me sign an investment guarantee the night after she leaked those photos of me and my former assistant." Micah clenched his jaw. "That scandal was fabricated?" "She hired a photographer, set the scene, had me followed. The assistant was transferred 2 days later with a bonus and an NDA." Micah exhaled sharply. "She weaponized your reputation." "She always did." I closed the laptop slowly. "It's time," I said. Time for what? Exposure. 2 days later, I walked into the boardroom at Wynn Pierce with a hard drive and 3 notarized affidavits from former employees who'd been let go after crossing Isolde. The room was quiet. 8 board members, all of whom had worked with us for years, watched as I laid out the evidence. "Before we discuss the motion to maintain my controlling interest," I began, "I want to be clear. This is not about revenge. It's about truth." I showed them the signatures, the bank transfers, the manipulated sale contracts, the fabricated scandal. I showed them who Isolde really was behind the black tie gowns and magazine covers. When I finished, no one clapped, but no one objected either. The vote was unanimous. I remained sole executor and CEO. The next morning, Luca Barone's team withdrew their motion, citing incomplete documentation. His press release claimed he was stepping back to grieve in peace, a lie wrapped in PR-scented pity. But I wasn't done. Sage called me that night. No anger, just silence at first. "I read the letter again," she said finally. "She never apologized to you, not really, just controlled you. She controlled everyone. I didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't want to?" Another long pause. "Am I like her?" she asked. That question held more weight than she realized. "You're not," I said carefully. "But you could become her, or you could become something better. What would that even look like?" "Accountability." She was quiet again. "Do you think she loved me?" "I think she loved how you reflected her." More silence. "I want to start over," she whispered. "Away from all of this. I want to do something that's mine." "Then I'll help you," I said. "But you'll need to cut ties with Barone. Fully. No contact. No defense. You tell the press the truth or you say nothing at all." She agreed. For the first time, I believed her. Later that week, Micah and I sat on the penthouse terrace. The apartment still held ghosts, but they were fading. "You did it," he said. "No," I corrected. "I started it. The rest is cleanup." He sipped his bourbon. "You ever going to forgive yourself?" "For what?" "For loving her. For not seeing it sooner." I thought about that. Then I answered, "No, but I'll live with it." He nodded. "Good, because there's still more to do." I looked at him. He leaned forward. "What if we relaunch Saratoga, legitimately this time, under your name, no shadows, full ownership?" I smiled. "You're serious?" "I'm offering to partner. I know vineyards, you know vision, and it's poetic." She tried to bury it. "We turn it into gold." I nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." Micah raised his glass. "To reclamation." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years I felt the weight shift. Not lifted, just moved. Moved to where I could carry it and walk forward. I didn't need to rehearse my entrance into the courtroom. The power I'd reclaimed didn't require dramatics. It radiated naturally, forged in silence and sharpened by months of betrayal, humiliation, and hard-won strategy. The door swung open. The eyes of reporters and opportunists turned like radar, and I walked in wearing a custom midnight blue Brioni suit Isolde had once told me made me look too capable to forgive. She wasn't wrong. Jonas Crane was already seated, legal pads stacked like a soldier's armor. He gave me a subtle nod, calm but alert. Across the aisle, Luca Barone appeared disheveled, like the weight of the spotlight had finally begun to crush the arrogance from his posture. His suit hung wrinkled, tie off-center, jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked like a man halfway through a bender, but trying to pass as someone holding it together. The judge, stern, unmoved, took immediate notice. Sage entered last, flanked by her court advocate and a psychologist appointed for the hearing. Her eyes were distant, guarded, as though afraid that if she blinked too long she might be dragged back into the shadows Isolde had woven. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Luca either. The proceedings began with a formal reading of Isolde's posthumous will. Her assets, all held in complex trusts, frozen pending court review. But that wasn't the focus today. Today was about Sage, who she belonged to, legally and emotionally. Isolde's forged version of a family narrative was crumbling. I was here to take back everything she tried to steal, starting with our daughter. My hands rested flat on the mahogany table, calm, visible. I didn't react as Jonas began our presentation, but inside, every nerve felt electric. The key wasn't just control, it was unveiling truth, slowly, methodically, like unsealing a long-contained vault of secrets. Your Honor, Jonas said clearly, we submit this document as evidence of undue influence and asset manipulation committed by the deceased, Isolde Wynne Pierce, and her romantic partner, Mr. Luca Barone. Gasps fluttered through the back row. The judge raised a brow. Proceed. Jonas handed over a sealed envelope, one Luca and his counsel had never seen. Inside was the mirrored USB drive I'd recovered from Isolde's private safe months ago. What she hadn't known, in her rush to hide her tracks, was that she'd left behind auto-saved metadata, email drafts, and timed deletion records, enough to paint a full picture, and sync them both. The judge's clerk connected it to a courtroom monitor. As the first projection lit the screen, emails between Isolde and Luca detailing financial siphoning, discussions of sending Sage to a therapeutic boarding school to silence her, and offshore transfers into accounts in Sage's name. Luca's face drained of color. He muttered something to his lawyer. It didn't matter. I didn't smirk. I didn't blink. I just looked ahead, unwavering. Your Honor, Jonas continued, voice like steel. These documents clearly demonstrate an ongoing pattern of coercion and manipulation. We request immediate revocation of Mr. Barone's custody petition, as well as full guardianship of Sage Pierce to be granted to my client. The judge turned to Luca. Do you wish to respond? Luca stammered. I need time to... My client wasn't made aware. Request for recess is denied, the judge snapped. You'll respond now. Luca's lawyer sank into his chair, defeated. No rebuttal came. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Sage's court-appointed psychologist asked to speak. She rose, steady and calm, a professional without embellishment. Your Honor, I conducted 5 private sessions with Miss Sage Pierce. Based on those, and corroborated by school records and behavioral notes, I submit that she has been subjected to emotional neglect, conditional affection, and subtle coercion under the care of the deceased and Mr. Barone. She has expressed fear of retaliation, isolation, and misappropriation of her trust fund. Sage didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at a fixed point on the wall. And then the psychologist added, she expressed that the only place she felt unjudged was with Mr. Pierce, not because he promised things, but because he asked her nothing and accepted her anyway. That's when Sage finally turned to look at me. No tears, just acknowledgement, and that was enough. The judge cleared his throat. In light of the evidence presented, undisclosed financial abuse, credible professional testimony, and the petitioner's preparedness, this court finds in favor of Grayson Pierce. Full guardianship is granted. Petition for joint custodial claim by Mr. Barone is dismissed with prejudice. A single gavel tap. Micah, seated in the back of the room, exhaled sharply. He'd been holding his breath the whole time. I hadn't realized I had too. Luca stood slowly, dazed. He tried to approach Sage. Baby, it's not like that. You know Mr. Barone, the bailiff warned. Sage recoiled, took a step closer to her advocate, and said in a clear, flat voice, Don't call me that. You never earned it. The courtroom froze. That single sentence rewrote everything. Outside the courthouse, the spring air buzzed with media chatter, microphones, flashing cameras. I held Sage's hand in mine. She didn't pull away. Mr. Pierce, would you like to comment on the ruling? I looked straight into the camera. It's done, and I'm just getting started. Back at the penthouse, the energy had shifted. Sage's bedroom had already been redone. Micah's design firm had executed it quietly, layering soft earth tones and removing every trace of Isolde's cold opulence. Her new bookshelf overflowed with titles. Some I'd picked, some she chose. The photo of Isolde on her desk had been replaced by one of her, me, and Micah, taken candidly last weekend when we went to the botanical garden. Later that night, Jonas arrived for bourbon and strategy. The battle over custody had ended, but the war over legacy was still very much alive. There's another matter, he said, setting down a file. It's about Sage's trust. The ones Isolde and Luca tried to bury under international shell companies. Turns out they're recoverable. How soon? Soon as we trigger the fraud clause in her estate's tax filings, but there's more. Isolde's private art collection was under Sage's name to shield it from prenup clauses. And if Sage chooses to dissolve those assets, guess who the executor is? I raised a brow. Me? He smiled. Exactly. Upstairs, Sage was watching a crime drama. I knocked on her open door. She looked up, uncertain. You did brave today, I said softly. She nodded. I didn't do it for you. I know, I replied. You did it for you. That's better. A pause. Then she added, I'm glad it was you who showed up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into what had once been Isolde's walk-in closet. Most of her things were gone, donated, boxed, or burned, but one small drawer remained locked. I opened it. Inside, a notebook, handwritten. It wasn't a journal. It was a ledger. Names, accounts, secrets. A map of all the people she'd manipulated. And how. I sat down on the velvet bench, flipping pages slowly. And I realized I hadn't just survived her. I had become the architect of my own vengeance, brick by brick, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Downstairs, I poured 2 glasses of bourbon. Micah accepted his with a small smile. So, what now? I held up the notebook. Now, I clean house. The next morning, Luca's photo was splashed across every financial crime watchdog site. The anonymous tip? Let's just say justice has many forms, and mine? It was precise. It was complete. It was only just beginning. Grayson didn't sleep the night after the amended will was upheld. He didn't need to. Power, once reclaimed, came with its own adrenaline. He stood by the tall windows of the penthouse, now entirely his, watching the midnight city pulse below, alive with sirens, ambition, and recklessness. The same city that once spit him out had bent a little tonight, but he wasn't done. By 6 a.m. he was dressed, reviewing the audit trail with Jonas Crane. They had eyes on every account Isolde touched in her last 12 months of life. Shell transfers, private trust movements, anonymous withdrawals from Monaco and the Caymans. And Luca's fingerprints were everywhere. Isolde's estate was more than tarnished. It was manipulated, orchestrated, hijacked. Jonas tilted his glasses down the bridge of his nose. "You want to go nuclear?" Grayson didn't blink. "I want to cauterize every open wound. That includes him." The first strike was surgical. Grayson froze Luca Barone's assets via a preemptive motion, granted under emergency civil injunction based on misappropriation of marital assets. By noon, Luca's black Bentley was repossessed, his brokerage accounts iced, and his Park Avenue condo sealed for forensic sweep. Grayson watched it all from a silent feed on Micah's phone. "You okay?" Micah asked, perched beside him on the terrace, his voice warm but alert. "No," Grayson said, "but I will be." Sage was nowhere to be seen that day. She hadn't spoken to him since the will's reading, only cold nods and clipped acknowledgments from the shadows of the hallway. But the silence was tactical now, not rebellious. She was watching. At 5 p.m., Grayson received a private email from a blocked address, a single JPEG attachment of Luca and Isolde, standing far too close in a villa courtyard in Amalfi, time-stamped exactly when Isolde claimed to be attending a women's entrepreneurship summit in Chicago. The sender, Delphine Lasker, Isolde's former best friend, disgraced PR agent, known for two things, blackmail and discretion. Grayson called Jonas immediately. "Offer her immunity. I want every receipt she has." "She's not trustworthy. She doesn't need to be. She just needs to talk." The next day, Sage lingered at the dining table longer than usual. She looked pale, thinner. Her eyes rimmed with the salt of sleeplessness. Grayson poured her coffee. "Do you hate me?" she asked suddenly, her voice dry. "I never did." She stared at him for a moment, then took the coffee, no cream, no sugar, just like Isolde. That night, Micah sat with him in the library, both of them silent as the news broke. Barone empire implodes, fraud allegations tie to widow's estate. Grayson closed his laptop slowly. Micah whistled. "They came for your throat. You slit theirs." "They handed me the blade," Grayson replied. The walls tightened around Luca. The forensic accountant found a 7-figure discrepancy between Isolde's declared assets and the actual holdings at the time of her death. Her philanthropic fund had been a siphon operation, one that benefited Luca and his mother, as well as a shadow LLC run out of Zurich. Jonas orchestrated a second motion, not only to seize what remained of the Barone estate, but to initiate criminal investigation under RICO, on grounds of fraudulent conspiracy within a pattern of misappropriated funds. Luca's lawyer, a man with a chin made for lying, begged for private mediation. Grayson refused. He wanted every document public, every deposition on record, every smug email read aloud in court. Sage watched the second hearing from the front row. She sat beside Micah, her hands folded tightly. At one point, Luca turned toward her with that false smile, half plea, half manipulation. Sage didn't blink. Her gaze was granite. Grayson stood before the judge with Jonas at his side, the sunlight cutting a sharp diagonal across the courtroom's floor. "Your Honor," Jonas began, "we submit into Record Exhibit C an audio file recorded less than 1 month before Mrs. Wynne Pierce's death." It played, Isolde's voice, half drunken, half defeated, confessing to Luca on a call that she took everything because he never really loved me, and I hated how he still made me feel small, even when I was rich. Grayson didn't flinch. The court held its breath. The judge looked at Luca with open disgust. You will not speak unless addressed directly. The media exploded. Headlines flared. Dead heiress, dirty money, jilted husband, reclaims empire. Grayson avoided interviews. He let the story tell itself. He'd won in court, but he wasn't done reclaiming his daughter. 2 days later, Sage entered his study carrying a half-burnt photo. The three of them on Christmas. Isolde's smile laminated in false warmth. I want to know the truth, Sage said. Not what she told me. Not what I was supposed to believe. So Grayson told her everything. The affair, the siphoned money, the plan to cut him out, brand him unstable, and flee with Luca. Her jaw trembled, but she didn't cry. I hated you for years, she whispered, but you never lied to me. She did. He didn't speak. He let her sit with that. And when she stood, she kissed his forehead. Don't stop fighting. For us. For what's left. The next gala arrived like a battlefield. Grayson wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. Micah walked beside him in navy, radiating calm. Whispers trailed behind them. Some pitied, others envied. All noticed. Gwyn, Isolde's sister, approached with venom masked in politeness. You're quite the phoenix, aren't you, Grayson? He smiled. I don't rise from ashes, I build from them. The last blow came subtly. Jonas handed Grayson a thick envelope in private. Inside, Luca's pre-signed NDA from years prior. Ironclad, admissible, forgotten. It invalidated every defense he had. And within it, a clause buried in Latin. Fiduciary betrayal forfeits all claims to associated estates upon proven breach. Grayson didn't announce it. He just filed it quietly. The court would read it. And when they did, it would be over. At home that night, Sage cooked for the first time in years. Simple pasta, too much garlic. It's not great, she warned. It's perfect, he said. They ate in silence. Together. Micah leaned on the doorframe after, eyes glinting. You're not the same man from 3 months ago. No, Grayson said. I'm not. Then he opened Isolde's journal, one Jonas had found during document recovery. Most pages were blank, but one entry caught his eye. He was never supposed to win. He smiled, closed the book, and let it burn in the fireplace. The courtroom was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was anticipation held hostage. Every breath in the chamber was drawn tight as Luca Barone took the witness stand, his Armani jacket wrinkled, hands trembling slightly under oath. Gone was the confident mogul who once basked in stolen spotlight. In his place stood a man haunted by paperwork, betrayal, and a preyed-upon empire. Grayson sat expressionless. His navy wool Tom Ford suit didn't need to declare victory. His silence did. He didn't fidget, didn't even tap a finger. Jonas Crane, his attorney, flipped a single sheet from a thick manila folder. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Barone, Jonas began, can you explain this $1.2 million transfer routed through Wynn Pierce Foundation accounts to a shell corporation you control in Delaware? Luca blinked, then hesitated. I wasn't aware of that exact routing. So the transfer authorized by Isolde Wynn Pierce, using your personal login credentials on March 15th, was a clerical error? The judge, a shrewd woman named Hollander with a glare sharp enough to slice marble, leaned forward. Answer the question directly, Mr. Barone. Sage sat beside Micah in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, nails pressing into skin. She didn't blink either. Grayson never turned to look at her, but he could feel her watching. That mattered more than the verdict. Jonas continued. Slide after slide, document after document, emails recovered, backdated wire approvals, internal memos marked confidential. It wasn't just financial misconduct, it was conspiracy. And then came the recording. The courtroom projector flared to life. Isolda's voice poured through the speakers, cool and commanding. Just make sure Grayson signs the Q3 balance sheet. He won't look twice. Once it's in, Luca can move the second tranche through Geneva. A gasp broke the silence. One juror's eyes darted toward Grayson. He didn't flinch. Not anymore. Hollander banged her gavel. Order! Luca's lawyer whispered something, urgent and panicked, into his ear. Luca's reply was visible only in the shaking of his shoulders. Micah leaned close to Sage. This is it. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I think it is. Back at the penthouse that evening, Grayson didn't celebrate. There were no champagne corks or toasts. He stood at the balcony with the city below, twinkling, like the lies he'd spent years believing. Micah brought him a tumbler of single malt and stood beside him without a word. Inside, Sage stared at an old photo of the three of them. Her mother, before the fall. Herself, wide-eyed. And Grayson, smile hesitant. She slid the photo into a drawer and replaced it with a new one. Grayson alone, arms around her shoulders and Micah's behind them, quiet but certain. Family wasn't built. It was chosen. The next morning, Luca didn't show up for the continuation of proceedings. A statement from his legal team declared a plea deal was being considered. But Judge Hollander wasn't so lenient. The state finds substantial grounds for indictment on fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction, she declared. Mr. Barone's assets are hereby frozen, pending full criminal investigation. Gasps again, murmurs, but Grayson didn't move. Instead, Jonas filed two new motions, one for sole conservatorship of the Wynne Pierce estate under Grayson's name. Another, confidential, slipped quietly into the court clerk's hand. It was a request for full legal guardianship of Sage Pierce. That evening, Sage approached Grayson in the penthouse kitchen. He was chopping garlic, his hands calm. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice shaking slightly. "Of course." "Do you want to be my legal dad?" The knife stopped. He looked up slowly. "Only if you want me to." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I want that." He stepped forward and hugged her, carefully, respectfully, as if holding something both fragile and precious. Micah watched from the doorway, tears in his own eyes. He didn't speak, just smiled. This was the victory. Not the asset seizures, not the headlines, not the power. This was the win that mattered. A week later, Grayson and Jonas sat down with the press for a carefully curated statement. The media was bloodthirsty for a scandal, but what they got was a scalpel. "Transparency is our currency now," Grayson began, his voice level. "The Wynne Pierce Foundation will be audited, restructured, and rebuilt. We'll ensure the public trust is not only restored, but deserved." Luca, meanwhile, was served with a formal indictment outside his gym in Tribeca, cameras catching every stunned blink as he was escorted into a waiting black SUV. He didn't speak to reporters, but tabloids later claimed he screamed Isolda's name in the holding cell for nearly 20 minutes straight. That night, the penthouse hosted no guests, no press, no gala. Just Grayson, Sage, and Micah, sharing takeout on the floor of the living room. Sage turned on a documentary and laid her head on Grayson's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he replied. "We did." Micah leaned against his side. "And we're not done yet." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Judge Hollander returned from recess. Grayson sat still, a quiet pillar in a room teetering on anticipation. Beside him, Sage's fingers curled around his, a gesture that once would have startled him. Now, it anchored him. Jonas leaned in. This is it. Luca Barone, dressed in a charcoal suit that could no longer disguise the sweat at his collar, stood alone. His high-powered attorney had abandoned ship after the last week's evidentiary disclosures, documents, recordings, testimonies, all culminating in a portrait of exploitation, coercion, and fraud. He was no longer a misunderstood entrepreneur. He was a villain with a shattered mask. Judge Hollander adjusted her glasses and began. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, it is the judgment of this court that the defendant, Luca Barone, is hereby sentenced to 5 years in state custody for aggravated fraud, asset manipulation, and endangerment of a minor's welfare. Luca's shoulders twitched. The courtroom held its breath. You are further ordered to provide full restitution to the estate of Isolde Wynne Pierce, cede your equity claims, and issue a public admission of wrongdoing in national media. Parole is denied. Gasps erupted. Grayson didn't flinch. He didn't need drama. He had justice. Sage whispered, He's really going to jail? Yes, Grayson said, and not the kind with champagne visitation hours. Behind them, reporters surged toward the exit. They wouldn't get a quote from Grayson. He wasn't there to perform. Later that afternoon, while Jonas dealt with paperwork and reporters begged for interviews, Sage asked to visit her mother's grave. Grayson hesitated, but Sage's face wasn't angry. It was steady. I need to let her go. The car ride to the private cemetery in Tarrytown was silent. The Hudson shimmered beside them, spring trees just starting to bloom. A gravekeeper opened the wrought iron gate as they pulled up. Grayson held back while Sage walked forward alone. She stood there for a long time. When she turned, she didn't cry. I'm done now, she said simply. They drove home without a word, but the silence no longer felt oppressive. It was peace. That evening, Micah came over with wine and takeout from Balthazar. I figured you wouldn't want to celebrate, but maybe decompress? They ate together, roast chicken, French bread, olives, and Sage laughed when Micah imitated Judge Hollander's dry voice reading Luca's charges. It wasn't disrespectful, it was healing. When Sage went to bed, she handed Grayson a small drawing. It was a pencil sketch. Him, Sage, and Micah on the terrace. The three of them, safe, close, smiling. Grayson couldn't speak. She drew that yesterday, Micah whispered, before the ruling. That night, Grayson sat alone in his study, holding the sketch. The city pulsed below him, alive and glittering. But he felt still for the first time in years. He scrolled through his old voicemails and paused at one. Isolde, months ago. You think you're better than me. You never will be. You'll never win. You don't have it in you. He listened, then deleted it. He didn't need to prove anything to a ghost. Across the room, Micah waited. You finally let her go, Micah said gently. Grayson nodded. The next morning, Luca's face was on every screen in the city. His mugshot, the sensationalized billionaire scandal coverage, the collapse of the Barone brand, every channel dissected it. Publications that once courted him now sliced him to pieces. Grayson declined all interview requests. Instead, he made breakfast for Sage and walked her through her NYU arts program packet. She asked questions. He answered like a father who'd always been there. By noon, he signed the final estate transfer. Every asset Luca and Isolde had hidden, vacation properties, shell companies, dormant accounts, now belonged to Sage's trust, or charitable foundations Isolde had gutted in her manipulation. That afternoon, Grayson received a letter from the board of the Manhattan Classical Museum. They wanted him back as a donor and trustee, not out of pity, but out of respect. He laughed, for the first time, long and real. He didn't answer right away. That night, the apartment felt warm again. Not cold marble and sterile art, but music, candlelight, shared food. Sage sprawled on the couch, sketching. Micah stood at the stove making risotto. Grayson watched them both and finally allowed himself to think, this is mine, this life, this family. They earned it in fire and came through unburned. Sage put down her pencil. I want to change my last name. Grayson raised his brow. To Pierce, she said. He blinked. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. Because you fought for me. Not because I'm erasing her, but because I'm keeping me. Micah teared up first. Grayson nodded. We'll make it official. The night ended with laughter and stories and old records. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The liars had been unmasked. The abuser was behind bars. And Grayson Pierce? He wasn't broken. He was whole. 6 months had passed. Manhattan, once a battlefield of whispers and scandal, had settled into the hush of a late October bloom. Golden leaves skimmed the sidewalks outside the brownstone Grayson now called home. A modest, elegant apartment overlooking Gramercy Park. It wasn't as vast as the penthouse he'd once shared with Isolde, but it was peaceful, honest, real. Grayson stood barefoot in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the espresso machine, the only sound breaking the early morning silence. Sage was already up, cross-legged on the couch, sketching. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her pencil tapping against her temple in rhythm with her thoughts. She was different now, not just older, but whole. Her laughter, once defensive and sharp-edged, had softened. The haunted look in her eyes had faded into something brighter, still cautious, but no longer broken. Micah walked in behind Grayson and draped his arms around him from behind. You're staring again. I'm watching, Grayson corrected, his voice low. I don't ever want to forget what this peace feels like. They had survived a war, not just the court battles or the headlines that made their private lives public property, but a deeper war, one of identity, of trust, of rebuilding what was shattered long before Isolde died. And now, here they were, alive, whole, together. Luca Barone was in prison. The financial crimes alone carried a stiff sentence, but the forged custodial paperwork, the hidden accounts, and the damning testimony from Sage had sealed his fate. The media had painted him as a manipulator, a wolf in custom tailoring, seducing his way into inheritance and power through deceit. In the end, even his expensive lawyers couldn't erase the truth. Sage had testified in court. Her voice hadn't shaken. I don't want his last name, she'd said. I never chose him. He chose to erase my real father to claim power. I want my real name back. Sage Pierce. The judge granted it. Grayson hadn't cried then. But when the papers arrived, official and notarized, Micah had wept in the hallway while Sage awkwardly patted his shoulder and muttered, Okay. Emotions are weird. I get it. Micah had moved in fully, unofficially at first. Then one morning his toothbrush was in the same cup, his socks in the laundry, and his coffee order memorized. He didn't ask, he just belonged. Grayson found himself laughing again, honestly. The guarded man who once measured every word was learning to breathe without fear of betrayal. The world no longer felt like glass underfoot. Grayson returned to the Met, not as a donor this time, but as an advisor for a new outreach program, one focused on youth in crisis. It was named the Wellspring Initiative, in honor of mothers who failed their daughters and the mentors who filled the silence they left behind. Jonas Crane, ever sharp, handled the trust settlements. Grayson had moved the remainder of Isolde's estate into a legal holding for Sage's education and charitable disbursements. Not a dollar of it would ever touch another Barone. One Sunday, as the city bloomed with color and chill, Sage handed him a folder with her NYU application inside. "I don't need you to read it," she said. "Just know it's because of you that I had something to say." Grayson nodded. No lectures, no advice, just pride. In late October, Grayson received an invitation, an award ceremony. The city council was recognizing individuals who had made exceptional civic contributions under duress. Jonas had submitted his name. He almost didn't go. But Sage insisted. "You've earned this. Stop being humble. That's how people like Isolde get power. They count on good people staying silent." So he went. The gala was crowded with politicians, philanthropists, and journalists who had once dragged his name through speculative mud. But now they applauded. The crowd rose when his name was called. The applause was thunderous, but Grayson only had eyes for two people in the front row: Sage, in a deep burgundy gown; Micah, in a tux that made him look like a Bond villain with better ethics. Grayson approached the podium. He didn't speak long. "I stand here not because I won a court case or reclaimed assets. I stand here because I survived betrayal without letting it turn me into something bitter. I chose to raise a child who deserved truth. I chose love, not vengeance. And I found family where I least expected it. Not through blood, but through action." He stepped down to silence, then thunder again. Outside, under the street lamps, Sage turned to him and asked, "Was that hard?" Grayson thought for a moment. "No. Speaking is never hard when you've lived it." She smiled. "Good. Because I wrote about it in my essay." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "The prompt was, 'Who shaped your moral code?' I picked you." He couldn't answer. The words wouldn't come, so he held her. Later that week, Micah found a stray dog outside a bookstore, half-starved, soaked from the rain. They took it in. Named her Marlowe. She slept at Sage's feet every night, her ears flicking in contentment. Life wasn't perfect. The news cycle moved on. There were days when grief resurfaced like a bruise catching the edge of a table, but the pain no longer defined them. One evening, as they sat curled on the couch, Sage asked, "Do you think she ever regretted it?" Grayson didn't answer right away. "I think she regretted being caught, not being cruel." Sage nodded. "Then she didn't deserve me." "No," Grayson said, pulling her closer. "But you deserve everything." In the final days of November, Grayson received a letter, not from Isolde's side of the family, but from a woman who'd once worked as their housekeeper. Her note was simple. "I always knew you were the real parent in that house. Thank you for proving it." He tucked it into a drawer beneath the photograph of Sage at age 8, missing teeth, bright eyes, arms thrown around his neck, before the secrets, before the fall. And so the story ended, not with fireworks or scandal, but with stillness, with routine, with healing. Grayson Pierce wasn't just a survivor. He was a victor. He'd reclaimed his name, his legacy, and the right to live in truth. Not as Isolde's husband, not as the silent partner to a scandal, but as a father, as a man who refused to be erased, as the one who, in the end, wrote the last word. Sometimes, the most profound victories are the ones no one sees. Not the courtroom triumphs, not the headlines or public apologies, not even the moment the villain stumbles or the traitor falls. True victory is quieter. It happens in the stillness, when the noise fades, the wounds begin to scar over, and breath returns without guilt or fear. Betrayal, at its core, is a spiritual violence. It fractures identity, disorients reality, and convinces the heart it cannot trust even its own rhythm. And yet, some rise, not by ignoring the pain, but by walking through it fully. Head up, eyes forward, voice steady. That's the truth this story holds. When love turns to manipulation, when loyalty is weaponized, and when power is hoarded instead of shared, the fallout is never just financial or social. It is deeply personal. It dismantles what we believe about ourselves. But what's even more personal, more potent, is what comes after. The decision to rebuild without bitterness. The choice to protect instead of punish. To lead instead of silence. To forgive, but never forget. Because survival is not enough. To endure cruelty and carry on is noble, but incomplete. The deeper work begins when survival turns into transformation. When the person who was once betrayed no longer fears the mirror, no longer explains their worth, no longer feels obligated to make their pain palatable for others. Justice, in this story, did not roar. It unfolded piece by piece, choice by choice. It was deliberate, measured, strategic, and in the end, it was total. The liar was exposed. The manipulator was unmasked. And those who thought they could write the story of another's life were forced to confront the power of the truth they tried to bury. But more important than revenge was reclamation, reclaiming the right to live in peace, to laugh without flinching, to raise a child without apology, to find love that doesn't demand silence. That is where this journey led, not to a courtroom win, but to a life reborn in honesty and safety, a life free from the weight of someone else's narrative. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all, strength is not loud. It doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't always wear armor or wield words like swords. Sometimes strength is knowing who you are even when the world tries to rewrite you. Sometimes it's choosing decency when you've been handed every reason to destroy. This story wasn't about a perfect ending. It was about justice without cruelty, about rebuilding after ruin, and about choosing peace, not because it's easy, but because it's powerful. So if you've ever been betrayed, underestimated, manipulated, or made to feel small, this story was for you. If you've ever doubted your worth because someone else couldn't see it, or sacrificed your voice to maintain someone else's comfort, know this: your truth is not a burden. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. And your healing is not a luxury. It's a right. May you never again apologize for surviving. May you never again let shame speak louder than your integrity. And may your quiet victories remind the world that real power comes from within. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Your support, your time, your reflections mean the world to us. If this story moved you, or if you saw something of yourself in it, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from, what moments stood out to you, and how these stories resonate in your own life. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. There's always another tale to tell, another journey to take. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and stay true to your story.